This is Lynn Fraser with the Kilby Center. I'm really, really pleased to welcome Nikki Myers. And we've been wanting to go really deep into what is actual recovery, and I know Nikki has a lot to say about that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nikki, and let you introduce yourself and get started.
So thank you, Lynn, and really thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this forum. I am certainly willing and really delighted to do anything that I possibly can, to offer anything that I possibly can for sustainable addiction recovery. And that's what I love to call it, sustainable addiction recovery. So I'll start out doing a little introduction. And I'm going to introduce myself the way that I introduce myself no matter where I am. You know, I usually say if I was speaking to the United Nations or I was speaking to Harvard Medical School, I'd introduce myself the same way. But as a matter of fact, a couple months ago, I actually spoke at Harvard Medical School. And
Cool.
I did. I introduced myself the exact same way, the same way that I'm going to speak here. And what I say is, hi, I'm Nikki. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a codependent. I'm the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a love addict. I'm a recovering debtor spender. And those three little letters, A-N-D, and is probably the most important word in the world to me, right? So, and I am the founder of Y12SR, which stands for the Yoga 12-Step Recovery. I'm an MBA. I am a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a trauma healing methodology. I am a yoga therapist. I am the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I am the grandmother of 5. I'm actually a great-grandmother. I'm very proud to say I'm actually a great-grandmother. And the big deal, again, is the and, that all of those things are true. And what I've discovered in this process for me of addiction recovery has been that for me, I can't separate any of those things. It's been a reintegration process, a part of me where I reintegrate all parts of myself. What I discovered is that if I make one part bad, awful, and wrong, and another part wonderful, good, and praiseworthy, all praises due, then what I do is create a split, that there's an internal war that goes on. And when that happens, it causes such a painful state inside of me that I will want to use something just to relieve that pain, right? So it's been for me this process of reintegrating all parts of myself. And the beauty of that for me is that while all of those things inform and have been experiences that inform my walk in this world, none of them define me. None of those things actually define me, right? None of them do. They do inform my walk in the world. Just like, you know, my current age informs my walk in the world. Just like as I sit here, you know, I'm a Black woman in the United States of America. That informs my walk in the world, right? But none of those things truly define me. None of those things truly define me. And it's been this process. What I've discovered is that when I deny, ignore, or repress one part of myself, right, then it's going to come out some way. It's going to come out sideways some way, right? So this big process for me has been, how do I bring all of them back in? There's, you're probably familiar with this as a yoga teacher yourself, but there's the Sufi poet Rumi. And Rumi has this beautiful, beautiful poem called The Guest House. Mm-hmm. And he's speaking in the guest house about, you know, he speaks of it in terms of certain emotions, a sadness, a meanness, any of those kinds of things. And he says, you meet them at the door laughing. And the line I love in that poem is, welcome and entertain them all. You know, they may be coming here to clear you out for some new delight, right? And so this is that process for me. I welcome and entertain all of those things, right? Knowing that all of those are a part of who I am, and none of them define me. So, and I love speaking about that, and I love saying the and. It's that and there that makes it's been so much a part, I know, of my personal healing. And, now in this work, I've worked with thousands of clients and students, over the years. And I see this as process of reintegration for them being a major part of the healing process, a major part of the healing process.
Right. So I'm going to jump in here just for a second because I have a question.
Go right ahead.
I was listening earlier to Tommy Rosen was interviewing you for Recovery 2.0, which is such a fantastic resource. And you were talking about radical honesty.
Yes.
And of course, not being able to face or to be present with the energies is what drives addiction. So how do you get from there to here?
Yeah. For me, and in a moment, I'll talk about the journey and what it's been like. But part of that process for me has been developing community. It's been developing safe and understanding. One of the things that's most important for me is to hold safe space for myself and to know what that means, what safety for me is, right? And so for me to keep that space for myself allows me a space, a container that can grow so that I can hold both of those things, right? And that's not something that happens overnight, right? And so it's something that happens over time. But, as you know, the 12-step program has been a big part of my process. And I love one of the things that they'll say in the 12-step program, which is just do the next good, right, honest thing, right? So I just want to put one foot and keep putting one foot in front of the other and doing the next good, right, honest thing. And from a yogic perspective, for me, that ties into what the yogis speak of relative to karma, right? That karma, for me, karma is a big topic. But what it really means for me is that the data that from this moment, for what I do in this moment, is something that's going to feed as a data input to the next moment. So I want to do the good, right, honest thing in this moment, so that that's the data point that feeds into the next moment. So I got foundation in the next moment. So when I have to really keep it simple, right, in this process, knowing, because when I start thinking about it, oh my God, it's going to take me so long to get there, and how am I going to do this? And the monkeys in the mind start to chatter, right? So I got to break it down and keep it simple. And for me, that is just keep doing the next good, right, honest thing. And sometimes that's as simple as getting up to brush my teeth, right? I may be I can't get the next good, right, honest thing could be get up and go to the bathroom, right? It doesn't have to be this big magnanimous thing. Sometimes it's those little, simple, small, but the mantra for me, just keep doing the next good, right, honest thing. And when I break it down moment by moment like that, I find it much more amenable, if you will, in order to, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Simple. And then you get to know after a while what the next right thing is based on what's happening inside.
That's right. That's right. And that's why hang on, there's Roxy. That's my 6-pound chihuahua back there, a little excited. So, so yes, one of the things that I believe is so important, this piece of as an added dimension for sustainable recovery, yoga as an added dimension. One of the reasons that I believe that in particularly in my case and many others that I've seen like me, that this is so important is because it adds the body dimension into it, right? And that's just one reason that it's important. There's just so many others.
Yeah.
But what I know, excuse me, and research shows is that your body really will tell you first. You know, it's really going to tell you first. So when I learned once again to retune in to the messages that are coming from the body, rather than just relying on the messages that come into my head, then there's a sensate feeling to these things that I know what the next good, right, honest thing is, right? There's a sensate, I know there's a sensate feeling to dishonesty, right? I can feel it, right? Yeah. So I can feel what honesty feels like. I can feel what it feels like in order to do the next good, right, honest thing, which again is why I always encourage this body-based. My thing is, I believe that and have seen that it's the marriage of the cognitive and the somatic, right? Somatic meaning body-based. I love the 12-step program, and a lot of it is based just here. You know, it's just cognitive. So this adds for me another dimension to it that much more supports a sustainability in recovery. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Thank you for the question. If it's okay with you, I'm going to go back to a little bit of my history, because I think it's number one. I love telling it. Number one, and I think there's some information within it that maybe your viewers might be able to glean from it.
And I also think that one of the really important things around recovery is hope.
Yes.
We're not just messed up forever. And so I like to hear stories like what you talk about, because it's not a simple, oh yeah, I saw the light and everything was fine.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your story.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, you know, I fell into the throes of the addiction actually relatively early in life. So, and you know, I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs of any of that, but I found the 12-step program, because there's some parts of this that are really interesting. I found the 12-step program in 1987. And by the time I found the 12-step program, you know, the 12-step program talks about jails, institutions, and death. I knew all of those. I knew, I'll just put it that way. I knew all of those. Addiction had taken me into domestic violence. It had taken me into prostitution. So, you know, commercial sex work in the streets, you know, jails, institutions, and death. And the death that I speak of, number one, just like today, although today more so than ever, I see wonderful, witty, and bright lights, you know, incredible beings dying from this disease of addiction.
Yeah.
Right? And so I've seen many die from this disease, and it was the death of my own soul. When I walked into those rooms, number one, I could barely put a sentence together. And there was what we always call a spiritual bankruptcy inside of me, that, you know, it was death. It was an emotional, psychological death that I was facing, not of the physical body, but of the rest of the body's just, you know, a death. So I found the 12-step program, and gratefully there, I found in the rooms of the 12-step program, there were people there who truly did love me till I could learn how to love myself, right? And I am so grateful for that. And that goes back into another piece that I believe is so important, and that's community, right? And having community. And how, you know, that phrase, no one can do this for you, but it's very difficult to do alone.
Right.
No one can do it for you, and you can't do it by yourself. We're interdependent beings, and I need support, right, in this thing. So I found that there, and, you know, I'm very gratefully. So my first 8 years of recovery, lots of incredible changes happened in my life. I went back to school. That was when I finished my undergrad degree. I finished the undergrad degree with straight A's, right? And then I finished my MBA. I finished my MBA with 1B. I got this great job. I was doing all this stuff, traveling all over the world, doing all this stuff. You know, really, really great stuff started happening. I got my kids back, you know, all of those kinds of things. Beautiful things started happening in my life. Well, very long story short, I was the job that I was working, which happened to be in computer software, which somehow I had an aptitude for, which I don't today. It's gone. But I somehow had an aptitude for it. And the company that I was working for sent me on a business trip, and they sent me on a trip over to a place in Germany, Garmisch, Germany. And as it turned out, it was a tumultuous trip. It was crazy. It took a day longer than it was supposed to. I got stuck in Vienna, and really at the time, Vienna was undergoing a lot of racial strife. And I had to spend the night in the airport. And it was just really scary. It was just a really scary situation for me. So I finally made it to where I was supposed to be in Germany. And by the time that I got there, the conference was at dinner. They were serving dinner, and the entree had already been served. And they were serving dessert. And I was, you know, that phrase they often use, halt. Don't let yourself get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Well, I was all four of those by that point.
Right,
Hungry,
yeah.
angry, lonely, and tired, all of the above. And what was being served was orange sherbet served in champagne. And I made the decision in that moment, right, to go ahead and go for the orange sherbet served in champagne. And it did just set something off. That was part of it. Now, you know, I don't want to say that was all of it, right? Because there were other things that had happened previous to that it was kind of the perfect storm, right?
Right.
That led up to this. But I made the decision. I went ahead and did the orange sherbet served in champagne. And the room that I had in this beautiful, luxurious hotel happened to have a mini bar in it. And I went back to my room that night and I drank. I always say it was like Denzel Washington drank at the end of the movie Flight, right?
Yeah,
And
I
I happen to think that movie is one of the best depictions of alcoholism I've ever seen on film. Right? And I did exactly what he did at the end of the movie. I drank the whole mini bar. I got up the next morning, almost like he did in that movie, and functioned, did what I needed to do. But then I went back to my room and I drank again. I kept on going. I kept on going. I kept on going. And when that trip was over, instead of flying back to the United States, I flew to Amsterdam.
Oh.
And in Amsterdam, I did exactly what you might expect.
Right.
But the story with that is that I think is so interesting and still gives me pause, is that once I went to Amsterdam, right, I morphed back into the person who had been in the streets. I knew exactly what to do. I knew exactly where to go. I knew exactly how to talk.
Mm-hmm.
I knew exactly every mannerism that was needed in order to find my drug of choice in a foreign country.
Right.
Foreign country, right? And for me, that ties in, it gets back to the yoga. It ties into the yoga teachings around what's called samskara, right?
Mm-hmm.
And samskara are habits, they're patterns, they're innate tendencies, they're all habitual conditioning, all of that kind of stuff, right? So I just fell back into that pattern, and I knew exactly. I hadn't had a drink or drug in my body for all those years, but
Right.
I knew exactly who to become to find my drug of choice, right?
Wow.
So I found my way back to the United States finally after calling for support and asking some people to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And I found my way back to the United States, and that was when I went back into 12-step rooms, right? And that was when I reunited with yoga. Yoga had been a part of my life, early on, like in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized then that there was something there, that there really was something there. But I got distracted. Other
Right.
things distracted me away from it. So after that relapse and coming home, after a while, I found yoga again. And again, fell in love, absolutely fell in love. And I started really getting deep in yoga philosophy and reading and all that kind of stuff. And I started noticing the similarities between yoga philosophy and the 12-step program. I would turn a page in a book and I go, damn, that sounds like the 12-step program, right?
Mm-hmm.
I turn another page in the book. Oh my God, that sounds like the 12-step program. And so I started getting really fascinated with this link between, these
Mm-hmm.
things. And I did that for a while. And after about 4 years, I decided that, and by this time I was very involved with the yoga practice. Particularly, I was practicing a style of yoga at that point called Ashtanga, which is a very definite, disciplined style of practice. And I was very involved with the Ashtanga practice in the Ashtanga community, at that point in time. And so I decided I didn't need the 12-step program anymore. I was tired of hearing the same old crap in those rooms over and over and over again. It wasn't really a great thing for me, right? And I stopped going to 12-step programs. I stopped supporting that part. And after 4 years, I relapsed again. So that's 2 relapses, And by this time, I'm just like, WTF,
Yeah.
I really was. It was like, I knew that I hadn't lost all the gray matter up here. I'd gotten all these great grades in school, right? I'd done the academic thing, gotten all these great grades in school, but something was missing. Something was definitely missing. And it was then that I recognized, at least for me, and now I see that for others like me, it's the same kind of thing, that there's got to be this tie between the cognitive and the somatic. I need both. I need, and more. And there's more that goes in with that too. But I need those 2 things tied in together. One of the things that we say in Y12SR all the time, our theme, right? It's been our theme for decades. I don't know if I'm the one who first came up with this phrase, but I'm the first one I heard say it. So I don't know, but I don't want to take credit. Nothing's original on this planet, right? But the phrase is, the issues live in our tissues. The issues live in our tissues. And so, there's got to be a way to not just release it at the level of mind. There's got to be a way to release it. And that's what all this work in trauma healing supports as well.
Yes.
The trauma lives in the body.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's got to be a way to release it out of the body as well. Mm-hmm. And so what we do in Y12SR is combine those 2 things. We combine the cognitive and the somatic with a trauma healing approach to support releasing the issues that live in our tissues. And, I'm grateful to say, it's just very, very recently, it's been 17 years since the last relapse. And for me, it's this process of creating what I love to call a sustainable platform for addiction recovery that includes both the cognitive and the somatic. It's got to include, those 2 at a very minimum.
Right.
Yeah.
So at some point in there, you took training with Peter Levine and became a
I did. So that was probably maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a while back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that work with your existing yoga practice? Did it change what you were doing and what you were teaching?
Certainly changed what I was doing in many ways. Between that and I studied with the American Vini Yoga Institute, which is Gary Crasso. Gary's my teacher. Okay. And so between those 2 things, and I did actually one right after the other. I became a yoga therapist first, and then I studied the somatic work. And all the time, I'm still doing this work in addiction recovery.
Right.
And so it was with that mind and with that body and with that eye, if you will, that I
Right.
went through all those trainings, right?
Oh.
Is the undergo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I work a lot with people with trauma as well. And it's always in the body. And it's usually tied to some thoughts as well. But the energy is in the body, and that's definitely where it has to come. The healing comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm very grateful to say it's been 17 years now since that last relapse. And it's, for me, is this, and it's more, that gets me more into a little bit of the yogic piece of this. The ancients talk about, there's a model that they speak about relative to in the Upanishads, one of the sacred texts of yoga, that says we're not one body, but we've got 5 bodies.
Right.
Right. And that those 5 bodies, and I assert that in order to really support sustainability in addiction recovery, that you got to address all 5 of those bodies, that in order to really have a sustainable platform, all 5 of those bodies need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So the yogis will say that those bodies are the physical body, which is, of course, the body that's made of food, right? We are what we eat,
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very interesting thing. When I really got that, I tell people all the time, it changed my relationship with food,
mm-hmm.
right? Because when I have an apple on the outside here, it's an object, an apple. But as soon as I take a bite into that apple becomes me, right? It becomes
Yes.
becomes me, right? And that very thought of that really changed my relationship with food from that point on, right? Once I really soaked that in,
mm-hmm.
right? And so there's the physical body, according to the ancients. There's the emotional or the energy body. I usually tell people when I'm explaining this, when you go to a physician and they take your vitals, right? The heart rate, the blood pressure, all this, they're measuring energy in the body.
Right.
The measurement of looking at energy in the body. So there's the energy body. Then the next one, according to the ancients, is the thinking body, the intellect, or the thinking body, right? And the real function of the intellect, according to the ancients, and really from what we know, is to coordinate things that come into our multidimensional system via your 5 senses, right? That's really the only way things get in, is via the 5 senses. So it's to coordinate all that sensory data and make sense and all that kind of stuff of all the sensory data. That's the function of the mind. And then according to the ancients, there's another body that, if you think of the mind as coordinating what's outside in, this one coordinates from the inside out. So this is where our values and our psycho-emotional states and our intuition, I talk about gut intuition, right? Mm-hmm. Our intuition, our intention, our layers of intention, it lies within that body, according to the ancient. And then the last one's the heart. And the heart is not the blood pump. This is the spiritual heart, the seat of love and joy and intimacy and devotion. And really, the idea is that when there's a sense of integration and alignment, I love that word alignment, right? Mm-hmm. Between and among the 5 bodies, when there's a sense of integration and connection, right? Between and among those 5 bodies, then this system experiences a sense of wholeness, that there is a sense of wholeness when the bodies are aligned. But when they're misaligned, right, or disconnected, then, dysfunction, disharmony, all of those disses can enter into the system, right? And so the whole idea is that we continue to find ways to support that sense of wholeness within the system, using tools, using practices, using each other, using food, using all the things that we need in order to support a sense of wholeness, to keep this within that sense of wholeness. right? And so, I assert again for sustainable addiction recovery that that's really the goal, that we can,
Right.
yeah, because when I'm in a sense of wholeness, number one, I make much better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we're not missing anything.
That's right.
So we
That's
don't have to
right.
seek it from the outside.
That's right. There's nothing to add, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing to add. Very often we'll talk about addiction in Y12SR, the Yoga 12-step recovery. We speak about it as the disease of the lost self. We
Mhm.
lose ourselves. We
Yeah.
lose ourselves. And I don't care what kind of addiction that is. So I don't care if we're talking about codependency or gambling or drugs and alcohol. It doesn't matter what it is. It's
Right.
the same thing. It's the disease of the law. We lose ourselves.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Isolation from and disconnection from within feels so painful. We
absolutely.
would do anything to not feel that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My
Mhm.
goodness.
That's a
Yeah.
beautiful description of the 5 bodies, the 5 koshas.
Yes. Yeah. That's a foundational piece of,
It is.
for me, of this work. Right. I love it.
And I'm sure that that informs your classes and your teaching as well as your even moving through the body. We relax the physical body first and then we get into the energy. And yeah,
It absolutely does.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What we love to do and look to do in Y12SR, because the bodies are gonna get misaligned. You
yeah.
know, we're living in this, what I love to call the matrix, right?
There's a lot of parallels to that movie.
A whole lot of parallels to that movie.
Yeah.
This binary framework, right? This is good,
Mhm.
this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, inferior, superior,
Yeah.
all those binaries, right?
Yeah.
And I really assert that ultimately the goal of yoga, and really ultimately the goal of the 12-step program, is to help us to move beyond, to know that there's something beyond that binary, that
Right.
there's something beyond that duality,
Hmm.
right? And so, so I really, so a lot of what we do in the practices in Y12SR is to give people these little tools to use in their daily lives when
Right.
I feel a sense of trigger or a sense of angst or a sense of moving out of my center, my own wholeness, to work, to pause, to bring them back into the wholeness,
Right.
right? Before I go out and make another decision. Yeah.
It would be maybe interesting to talk a little bit about trauma and how, just go a little bit deeper into how it lives in the body. And
Absolutely.
my experience personally and with other people too is that it's really scary. It takes a lot of courage to actually be present with what's inside.
Right.
What might you say about that?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I love the Peter Levine approach, the somatic experiencing approach, is because there are ways to release it from the body without necessarily re-traumatizing ourselves through going back in a whole big cognitive discussion about, what happened when, because some things we may never ever even know,
True.
right? There may be a trauma that I cannot cognitively identify,
Right.
right? For example, it might be birth trauma,
Hmm.
right? And I may never really have a recollection of that, but if my cells record everything, which we know that they do, that is still there,
Right.
right? So I love, and what we look to incorporate in the Y12SR practices is ways to release those things from the body, even when I don't have a cognitive explanation
Hmm.
for them. And I love that work, for that reason. And again, we've tried to tie that into the way we teach our teachers to
Hmm.
actually teach their yoga classes with that trauma-informed technique. So
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, I don't necessarily have to tie it to anything. What I do have to do, and what is my responsibility, is to create this space for myself, right?
Yeah.
A safe container for myself to allow that release to happen. So we do a lot of teaching around what it means to hold a safe container for yourself. Now, safety, we'll tell teachers all the time, and I know this for a fact, safety is relative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what feels safe for me may be completely and totally unsafe for you,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's
Mm-hmm.
relative, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not for me to enforce as a teacher a sense of what safety means for an individual, but to teach people to feel within their body. And this is again where we use some of those beautiful phrases. Really, you know, I say from the 12-step program, but this was around way longer than the 12-step.
Right.
They got it from someplace.
Yeah.
It's the piece of the serenity prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
To know what it means to have in my body the wisdom to know the difference.
Right.
When you do too much, you risk injury. When you do too little, you risk atrophy. And we don't want either one, right?
Right.
We're looking for that middle path, which is the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So teaching people what that means and how I can feel the wisdom to know the difference within this body, right? And what that sensately feels like, which may be very different than the way it feels for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? It feels, but what it means for me to be in homeostasis,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and so that's what we look to teach people, how to create this safety container that you create for yourself so that we can allow what's being held to release, so that it has this safe space to release. Yeah.
One of the, I think it was Bessel van der Kolk said, safety is the treatment.
That's right.
And that's certainly my experience too. And if people can create that safety with support and all the things that have to happen for that to be your experience, then everything wants to be healed. It just comes up and it's.
That's it. We say it, I kind of love the way I got this from a teacher when I was working at a treatment center years ago, and then from another teacher who I dearly love named Matthew Sanford, who talks about energy, right? And how, you know, and we know this, the nature of energy is to move.
Right.
And energy will really only move when it feels safe. It'll only move when it feels safe. Right. And what we're looking for is to help folks create this safe space so that this energy can move. Because when I repress it or deny it or, you know, keep it stored and stuffed and all that, then it turns into something else.
Right.
Anger will turn into rage, right? Or, you know, it's going to turn into something else. So through the practices, we want to create this safe space, whatever that is relatively for you, for that energy to move.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say to people if they are not too sure about how that could work? Like we've got yoga, we've got 12 steps. You mentioned some more elements, community.
Yeah. You know, again, my thing is always to go back to, I love the KISS, to keep it simple, right? Just keep it simple. And for me, the biggest thing for me was going back and figuring out what was most important to me. What was most important to me? What it was that I value, right? What is it that I really value? And then what the yogis say is that we have 3 spheres of influence. Not to confuse those with control, because we really don't have any control.
Yeah. That's a hard one to accept, but yeah.
I know. The illusion of control, right? But we do have spheres of influence, right? We can influence our thought, our speech, and our actions, our own, not anybody else's, but our thoughts,
Right.
our speech, and our actions. Those are spheres of influence that we have. And so my question to myself is always, you know, does this, whether it's thought, speech, or actions, support what I say is most important to me? One of the things I discovered about me in relapse was I relapse when I'm out of integrity with myself. That the
Right.
key deal was for me to be in integrity with myself. And integrity for me means that my thoughts, my speech, right, my behavior is aligned with what I say is most important to me. When it's misaligned, when there's no alignment between my thoughts, my speech, and my actions, and my values, then I'm out of integrity with myself. And that causes such a painful state in me that, you know, I want to do something to relieve the pain,
Right.
right? And that may be a drink, a drug, a crazy behavior, you know, I mean, any of those kinds of things, because I just want to relieve that painful state. Right. So it's important for me, you know, for I believe and always suggest that we start to realign with what it is that's important to us, what's really our sense of values. And then I can ask myself the question, okay, does this choice in front of me now align with what I say is most important to me? And if it doesn't, that's not an action I want to take.
Right.
Right. That's just not where I want to go. Right.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I know what the road that leads me on. And I don't want to travel that road. That's been a painful road. And I don't want to go down that road again.
Is there a quote that informs your work?
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
You know, it doesn't have to be just one if there's more.
There, you know, that whole Rumi thing, that poem, The Guest House, really informs a lot of my work. Again, like I was saying earlier, for me, it's been this reintegration process, right? I said a little bit about my history in there was a point in time, right, where because of the early childhood sexual stuff, I couldn't look at a picture of me when I was at that age. Right? I couldn't. And so I made that little girl bad, awful, wrong. I told her she didn't have a place within here and all of that, right? So again, that poem, it kind of reminds me of, it's so funny because it's like the older I get, the more my favorite movies are like Pixar cartoons.
There's some wisdom in some of them.
I know. And the one I'm thinking about now and referencing is that one Inside Out. I don't know if,
I did. Excellent movie.
It wasn't great, right? And it was kind of like that. I threw that little girl out, just like in that movie, they threw Sad out and didn't want to let her in to the process. And it wreaked havoc in the system.
Yeah.
It wreaked havoc until you welcome, until I really got, you know, and welcome and change. And, you know, there was another piece of me in the commercial sex work. I made that girl bad, awful, and wrong and told her she had to get out and, you know, because that wasn't me and all of that kind of stuff. And what happened was my experience was almost like Inside Out. She came out sideways, right? She just came out. It wasn't the same behavior, but it was still behavior that was sideways, right? Until I really got that I don't have to be in that with that behavior anymore. But there were some parts of her, right, that really served me well in my work that I do in the world here today.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important for me to welcome her into the fold as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you know, so I love that whole poem, that welcome and entertain them all. And again, that Inside Out is the big one around that.
Yeah.
And then you were speaking a little bit earlier about connection and how important connection is and how we isolate. The other movie, though, that I dearly love, again, was supposed to be a kid's movie, but not really a kid's movie at all, was Avatar.
Oh, yes.
Right, and it was that line in Avatar. It was when the greeting that they greeted each other with was, "I see you." And what I truly believe, really, that any of us want is to know that our existence matters, to know that we are seen and that our existence matters, right? And so it's those two things that probably inform, and many others, of course, many others. But those are two of the things that really inform my work, and this work in the world with Y12SR, that, is an underlying piece of the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
When you invite those parts back, then we see ourselves
in wholeness.
In wholeness, yeah.
Right. We move beyond the duality of this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, and I think about that all the time. How can that be? I think about in this moment what at one point in time appeared to be the absolute most devastating thing that I could have ever faced.
Right.
Jails, institutions, and death, and the most devastating has become the gift of my life. It's the exact same thing. Is the absolute gift of my life, right? And that's, for me, a result of energy that's moved. It's shifted, it's changed, it's moved into something else, right? It's not held, denied, repressed anymore. It's moved and it's changed forms into something else, right? And so I'm so grateful for it today. I don't know what to do. It's the source of a true gift.
Well, and for everyone who's really stuck in that shame and just kind of mired in that, there's so many things here that very practical ways to turn inward and to start to move that energy and
to move it, to shift it. Yeah, allow it to move. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful.
I love it. I love it.
Is there anything that you would like to finish with? Anything you haven't said that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Just that Y12SR, so the Yoga 12-Step Recovery. Now it's been one of these things that have been so completely organic that it truly blows my mind, right? And I continue to say, as an organization, our job is just to water the soil and do the things that we need to do so that whatever it's going to do to grow, it's going to do to grow, to help support the environment for it to grow. But now there are meetings, in many places across the world, and what they look like is a principled 12-step based discussion, followed by that centers around, because I truly believe, again, that the 12-step program is pretty brilliant. The 12 steps are pretty brilliant. They're brilliant, right? And so to get at the jewel of the brilliance that's there. Now, I'll say, I'll take it for granted. There's been some implementation in certain places because of the structure of it, the way that it needs to be, so that it is so accessible. That sometimes it's not. I've been to some very unsafe environments. For 12-step programs. And, I don't want to, that's not a put down, because I've also been to some very unsafe yoga classes.
Right.
So both things are true, right? So it's not like a put down, right? So I'm not making it a put down. Right. But what we look to do in this combination is just take particularly the spiritual principles that are underneath the 12 steps,
Mm-hmm.
right? And understand that I can feel those. Again, getting back to the body in
Right.
this sensate way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if I can feel it, I can know whether it gives me a level of awareness to
Mm-hmm.
know whether I'm in it or out of it.
Right.
And as soon as I have the awareness to recognize, oh my, maybe I've strayed a little bit over here too far. What tools can I now use
Right.
to bring me back to balance?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh my goodness, I'm off balance a little bit over this way. What tools can I use to help restore balance? Right? So this is what we look to teach. And now there are these meetings that the 12-step practices and discussion groups that go on across the world. And it's just amazed me that it's got the kind of growth that it has. So I would invite anyone to look on our website and see if there is a Y12SR meeting someplace near, and go visit and just see, you know, maybe this can be a part of their sustainable platform for addiction recovery, right? We talk about it as this is a piece for relapse prevention, right? It
Yep.
fits in the
Mm-hmm.
whole area of relapse prevention. So maybe this could be a tool for a relapse prevention for someone else. And if it is, you know, I think it might be worthy of just checking it out to see.
Right.
And if you're a yoga teacher and, you know, this is a population that calls you in order to work with, we do trainings all over the world in order to prepare a yoga teacher to go back into their own home communities and offer Y12SR meetings and practices to their own home communities.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And you'll find all of that on the website.
Yeah, and it's, can you just say the website address?
Yeah, it's Y12SR. So that stands for Yoga of 12-Step Recovery.
Okay.
Y12SR.
.com?
.com.
.com. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This has been really interesting and valuable, and I'm so glad we had the chance to do this.
I am too. It's great to meet you, Lynn, and I so respect the work that's done there. And so thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Oh, our pleasure. Go to kilbycenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, to see the full schedule of speakers and to register to watch these free online September 23rd and 24th in the Radical Recovery Summit 2017.